Hello and welcome to the International Climate Webinar series of interviews with international industry experts and leaders. Today, we are talking with an energy executive who not just navigate change, he drives it. A leader known for innovation and operational excellence, further recognized with the prestigious Serve with Integrity Award, acknowledging his transformative work at PGM, and also with the esteemed IEEE Life Senior member status. Welcome with us the leader whose vision shaped PGM. Thank you, Phil Harris, for joining us today.
You're welcome. Glad to be with you.
Having observed the evolution of power market globally, what movie character will the electricity grid look like? And what the features you see?
Well, what comes to mind is Charlton Heston in that movie, The Ten Commandments. Here, everyone was looking for the promised land. They had different definitions of it, but they all wanted to gain it. But there was a lot of chaos.
Great movie and great example. Thank you. What critical innovation is necessary to ensure grid resilience despite the increase in adoption of renewables?
Well, I think we got to recognize two things. Number one, there isn't a single thing. Remember, the grid is just a giant ecological system that moves at the speed of light. Else, and if it's not in balance, it dies. That's the reality of the physics. At the same time, policymakers will be making decisions that affect their economy for the future. So to get those two closure, to find the right policies and yet make sure that the ecological system doesn't die, is a difficult task. So we need honest intellectual honesty, good communications, ideas opening, and the realization that it's constantly changing. And an ecological system, you get rid of some nasty weeds there and maybe prune something over here and maybe water more in one location. That's the grid. It's an ecological system that's moving, and we need to nurture it and take care of it. So it'll be a continuum of change.
Thank you. Beyond cost, Phil, what is the biggest hurdle to the broader deployment of fast-acting HVDC device?
Well, I think there's two things there. I think one is there's not enough engineering talent that is well schooled and well versed in the fast acting HVDC devices. I think the mechanisms that are there need to be studied, they need to be evaluated, they need to be involved in the simulation models, but just a lack of good engineers that can understand and do those kind of studies enable it to go forward. I think secondly is again to recognize the evolution of the grid, how we've grown it to be a large synchronized grid, and the stages that are necessary to be able to put in the flexible load and other devices, that DC's time has come. It's the next level. The devices and the lines, both overhead and buried, need to be there. That getting the talent that can be deliverable and then finding processes to be able to study them and bring them on reliably is the key.
Thank you. You've advised Phil on the Beijing Olympic grid and the Navajo Nation. What unexpected energy issue have you faced, small or less?
Well, it's basically the same everywhere. Every country's different. Every need is a little different, but it's how to work and communicate with the policymakers, understand the ecology of their grid. Every ecological system's different. Singapore, same physics, but the way their grid is different than, say, Ukraine. So we need to find that balance to understand what their current ecology is, what's necessary to go forward, and then ways to communicate that with policymakers so we can reach a rational decision. And again, it's not a single point in time event. It's a continuum of change, a rational change, so that every time you go forward, you're closer to the goals that you.
Going to, again, to electricity market. What is the most misunderstood aspect of modern wholesale design in the electricity market?
Yeah, there's two things. We know right now in the short run economics of electricity markets that is working very, very well. The energy component, as data is proved all over the world, that's the most efficient way to have energy allocated in the most economic on that, and countries are doing that wide over. Where we're not there yet is long-run efficiencies. How do we derive the right price signals for long-term investment? And it's a very difficult problem because the price of capital to make that long-term investment is huge. So can you just have a high enough price that people invest, such as ERCOT model is trying to do? And the answer is no, because if the prices get high enough, that the politicians will get involved. The policymakers will get involved because the people are complaining because of the prices, and rightly so. In PJM, we have a capacity market. It's not really a market. It's more of a designed auction to be more perfectly correct with what it actually is. Even that built and it's working. It's also changed many times to adapt and grow to the needs. But when it gets too high, policymakers will come in and find a way to adjust it. So we're not quite there yet on the long run efficiency.
Going to the regulation part, what is a key regulatory change that are essential to unlock further smart grid innovation and deployment?
Well, I think one is an understanding of that. Again, I go back to the point the grid is a giant ecological system. Thing affects everything else on that grid. So when we put in something to help flexible load, for example, how is that affecting the grid? And that has to be studied and managed. The difficulty is because one thing affects everything else on the electrical grid, and you can't afford a single mistake. On the power grid, we're actually flying an airplane that never lands. I mean, think about that. We want to change the engines, change the instrumentations, change the pilots, the skills, change the wing structure, all of this while this plane is flying. So we have to be very, very, very careful we do that correctly. At the same time, we can't let that be the enemy of the good and being able to move forward. So that means we have to have the studies and the capability to increment our way through that and to achieve these goals. So we have to have the ability to analyze, the ability to implement, but not be so afraid that we do not move forward. And we got to find a way to move forward on a timely basis. I'm excited about what I see happening in PJM with Andy Ott leading the effort that with Google to try to find artificial intelligence to get through the queues faster. The study queues are a huge stumbling block. If we can cut that down and cut the timing on that down, it'll have a huge improvement. So I think artificial intelligence has a real value add. At the same time, we got to be extraordinarily careful. Remember, it's an ecological system at the speed of light, and it can die in the blink of an eye.
Thank you so much. I have so many other questions lined up, but the time is short. 10 minutes is not enough for a mind like yours. But let me ask a last question. As an energy expert, what is one guiding principle for expanding the energy access while safeguarding the resources and protecting our climate? One guide.
Well, yeah, I think that we're in the next frontier. If you look at most organized markets in the worldwide, they're now optimizing on about 15-minute cycles. Some are even down to 5 minutes. That's pushing the envelope closer and closer to real time. Real time would be speed of light, and we're never going to achieve that. But we're getting very close to the edge of the envelope. So think about the evolution of jet airplanes. They flew it a certain way, then they got higher, faster, better, but you had to have more and more computerized applications because the pilot just couldn't process that a vast amount of information envelope today. So being able to develop the control systems and the mechanisms in ways that we can control the grid as it gets closer to that real-time envelope is the single most crucial step that has to be taken. And it's got to be done wisely, and it's got to be done well. There's some people who have different solutions about how to achieve it, but there's no unified approach or single approach to do that. And I think we should all envelop that as our biggest challenge.
Thank you, Philip Harris, for your insight today. I want to thank you for all the work you have done for the electricity industry and the power grid. And I hope for you a good health and see you soon.
Thank you.
Good morning and welcome, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. I trust that the interview has already sparked some questions and ideas, perfectly framing the conversation we are about to have. Today, we are hosting the third International Climate Webinar Series for the North American chapter. We will discuss a topic directly impacting our future on energy and grid transition. I'm Salima Ibash-Steven, ICWS Commissioner, and I'm your host today. Building on the insight from that interview and the past discussions we have, over the next 60 minutes, we'll strategically explore three core pillars: understanding energy transition, navigating the complexity of grid transformation, and identifying cutting edge solutions and investment mechanisms. All this will be done through the lens of the US experience. We want your active participation. Don't hesitate to ask questions to our panelists, and we will distill all the information to let you go after the closing of the session with valuable information. So it's a privilege to welcome today and introduce the brilliant minds that will do this conversation for us today. Let me introduce to now Karen Wayland. To welcome Karen. Karen Wayland is a national expert in energy and environmental policy, possessing extensive leadership experience in both government and non-profit industry and sectors. She also is a former senior advisor at the DOE. Additionally, she serves on several energy-focused boards. Thank you for joining us today, Karen. Ruben Lianes is the CEO of Digital Grid at Schneider Electric and president of North American Power and Grid. He is a seasoned clean tech executive. He leads global software businesses empowering utilities for sustainable and flexible grid. We are happy to have you with us, Ruben. Thank you. Tanya Peacock is the managing director of hydrogen at Eco Engineers. She is an innovative energy leader with deep expertise in climate policy, renewables, hydrogen, and carbon markets. Thank you for coming back, Tanya, for this discussion. Alan Steven, he is the founder and CEO of Energy One Solution International. He's an international expert with over 50 years of experience in the power industry. He's a former CTO of PGM. He holds 7 patents in advanced demand response. He is also a board member of the Greater Washington Region Clean Cities Coalitions. Thank you for coming back, Alan. Scott Amiduri is the president and co-founder of Enerlogics. He has over 20 years in technology and energy project development, including solar and storage. He leads Enerlogics in providing intelligent distributed generation solution for various clients. Thank you, Scott. Joan Michelson is an award-winning journalist, executive, and thought leader. She focuses on climate, energy, sustainability, and ESG issues, and hosts the Electric Ladies podcast. She writes on these topics for Forbes, and she is our moderator and guest today. And Joan, thank you for your leadership, and I hand over the mic.
Thank you so much, Salima, and welcome everybody. It's a privilege to be here. Like you, Salima, your conversation with Phil Harris sparked about 400 questions, but I think we can get through them with dexterity. How's that for a segue? So I want to start with the pink elephant in the middle of the room. That obviously last night, anybody who's in the United States or following U.S. energy policy or and politics knows that the House of Representatives passed a reconciliation bill last night that guts a lot of the clean energy tax credits and grid enhancements and community resilience projects that were passed historically, frankly, before in the Inflation Reduction Act, the Infrastructure Act, and also even in the CHIPS and Science Act. So I first of all, I want to acknowledge that because we can't really have this conversation without realizing that. And so I want to start, Karen, I actually want to start with you if it's okay. Speaking of Gridwise, the bill that passed last night is a gut punch, or if it passes the Senate, would be a gut punch to a lot of communities, but it would also be a gut punch to the grid. So what can Gridwise, what is or can the Gridwise Alliance members, and what are they saying about it? How are they looking to integrate to get or support? I'm sorry, how are they looking to advocate to get support for the grid and these tax credits or whatever kept in line so that the communities don't suffer? These credits and these incentives are creating tremendous economic growth in those communities as well as backing up the grid. So what is the Gridwise Alliance position? What are you hearing from your members?
Well, I'm hearing both frustration and confusion, because we really don't know exactly what's in the bill or what will happen in the Senate. And I'll just note, having worked in Washington for 20 something years on energy issues, that Congress has not had a great history of providing certainty to the energy industry in terms of a tax regime. I mean, we have tax credits that are on 1 year, expire, and then if Congress does approve them, they're retroactive. So I think the biggest thing that I'm hearing from members, and this has to do with the tariff issue, it has to do with supply chain issues, it has to do with the tax credit issues, is that we really lack certainty that will really drive the investment that we need to modernize the grid and to transition to a low carbon economy. So really, that certainty is something that we're not seeing in this bill or in generally in the policy discussions that we're having.
So what are they doing about that? How are they managing that uncertainty? I mean, frankly, being an executive means managing ambiguity and uncertainty, right? You can't manage. There's nothing is 100% certain all the time, right? That's why they get the big checks, so to speak. So what are they doing? I mean, how are they managing it?
Well, I have sort of two sets of members. Our some of our members are utilities, and a large part of our membership are grid equipment manufacturers and technology solution providers. And I think they're tackling things a little bit differently. So on the utility side, regardless of what federal policy is, utilities make long-term investment decisions and plans. So those plans aren't necessarily going to change just because federal policy changes. And so the grid has to be modernized. We have to find a flexible set of resources to provide electricity and reliability and resilience. And the utilities are going to continue to make those investments. These are large, expensive projects. And obviously, I mean, Phil mentioned that policymakers will be watching, and when rates start to go up, they would like to get involved because the impacts on ratepayers can be significant. And so one of the things that we were looking at for federal policy was helping to take some of the risk off those investment decisions at the individual utility level or at the state level, by tax credits, by grant programs and those things. But even with those grant programs and tax credits standing, the reality is that we have a significant amount of need for investment. Those investments are going to continue to happen. They may not happen as fast. And that's certainly what I'm hearing from our technology solution providers, which is that they are likely in a cost containment environment rather than an investment environment, because uncertainty is so great. And I know we have some other people on the panel who are intimately involved in making those decisions. So I will not try to speak too much for them.
Great, thank you. And we'll get into the investment piece in a little bit as well. So thank you for that. I appreciate it. And I feel their pain. That goes to the long-term investment and long-run needs that Phil mentioned as well. Ruben, I want to jump to you. I had a blackout last week. Okay. I
Yeah.
lost power for 6 hours and I'm in the DC area. This is hitting home, right? Spain and Portugal are going through blackouts. I mean, this happens, right? We need a reliable grid. What are the top grid modernization strategies that will stop us from having blackouts and to Karen's point, we need at least certainty that the power is going to be on, that when we flip the switch, it's going to work, right? So what kinds of grid modernization strategies are working best? And to Phil's point of we need to be inventing, fixing the plane and transforming the plane at the same time we're flying it, right? So what's being done, and are the incrementalisms enough? So pull on that thread for a bit.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Joan. First of all, I love that. I love that analogy because it's very true. And then you can only compound that by the amount of complexity of having north of 3,000 planes in the air at the same time, meaning the number of utilities that are in the United States to begin with. As it relates to Portugal, Spain, that's still, the root cause is still under investigation at the moment, although there are lots of ideas around kind of what the root cause there is. But so I'll talk just more generically to your question, Joan. And to me, there's two critical pillars that I think that we need to be focused on. The first is accelerating and strengthening, hardening the electricity grids through increased infrastructure investment, as well as digitalization. So I'll talk about that. And then the second, which I don't know is oftentimes spoken to enough, and that's looking at the demand side equation, right? So oftentimes we're looking at trying to solve the supply side, but there's also a demand equation that I think that if you bring those two things together, the gap starts to narrow in terms of the challenge at hand. And then, of course, there's going to be an underlying requirement of effective legislation as well as incentives that are needed in order to be able to create the correct incentive structures to kind of bring this all to bear. So if I kind of unpack this a little bit at a time, so number one, to effectively manage blackouts, let's start first with the hardware aspects. So that hardware could be anything from connected switchgear or energy management distribution equipment, protection relays, sensors, metering systems. So the idea is basically to have a bird's eye view of the underlying kind of inner workings of the distributed assets that are in the field for these utilities. So that's the one thing, is to make sure that you're investing in hardware. I think it's worth pointing out also on the hardware side that you still have extended lead times. So still have extended lead times with things like transformers that can take upwards of 2 to 3 years of lead time that before were in kind of the 18 to less than 2 year time frame. And so I guess where I'm going with this is that starts to set up the requirement to also be thinking about what are the software opportunities that you have there to digitize the grid and to start to extract more out of the assets that are already deployed in the field. And so this is where I think you can start to see some really great opportunities around building a resilient, efficient, future-ready grid that starts to include things like looking at the network model. From that, you're able to look at asset health, identify areas for predictive maintenance. And so what this allows to do, Joan, instead of you having to be an experience where your lights go out, we're able to get in front of it and start to dispatch crews that are able to identify challenges before they happen. And so, if you look at this interoperability between hardware as well as digital solutions, I think you have the opportunity to really, confidently scale and measure that impact as time goes on.
Thank you for that. Talk about this whole, again, this all requires huge investments and long-term strategies, and what the folks do down the block from me, because I live in the DC area, is a moment in time. But these companies are making investments, as you all are talking about, for huge investments over a long term. I interviewed Doreen Harris, who is head of NYSERDA, and they're making investments for decades. They don't think in, not even 4 years. They don't even, or one. They think in 20, 30, 40, 50 years, right? And that's a whole different paradigm. So when you talk about making these investments now and in effect using more with less to coordinate the hardware and the software and making the software updatable, quickly and things like that, right? And having the predictive maintenance so that you can keep those assets online for longer while you're making transformations to the plane, right? How does that work? How are your clients, and how is Schneider Electric suggesting to its clients to figure out that puzzle, especially in an uncertain market?
Yeah, it's a great question, and you're right. Utility executives are not thinking along political, cycles. They're not thinking along very short term. You're right. They are thinking long term. So I'll tell you this: as you look at things like the types of solutions that Schneider Electric brings to utilities, these are enterprise level software, and you're talking about controlling and managing critical infrastructure. So what though I think the way that I would answer your question would be to say we have very kind of strong and proactive dialogues with utilities, because what they're thinking of is who is it from a technology provider perspective that I'm going to align with, knowing that that relationship is going to last for an extended period of time. And so as we have conversations, what we're trying to articulate is what are the investments that we're making, not only today, which is a current set of solutions that we have, but longer term, and how does that product portfolio and that set of solutions align with their needs. And so if you've worked with a utility, you've worked with a utility, because they are as different as they all have legacy tech stacks that they're working with. They all have very different load requirements. And so if you think about that kind of in a very homogeneous way, that's why we get engaged with them in a long-term strategic engagement, and to say, what are the specific use cases that you need to address today? How do you expect it to change over time? So here's where we're able to work along with the planning side of the utility. And then you bring that together with what's happening on the OT side of the house. And then you're able to kind of have something that future proofs some of the decision making that they're making. So I think that utility executives are very much focused on de-risk. How do you de-risk using technologies that allow for you to keep the lights on today, but with an eye towards the future around how you're able to put in place the right solution sets that grow with their use cases over time.
Great. Yeah. Manage the things you can manage, reduce the risks of the things you can reduce the risk of, because there's a whole lot of stuff you can't, right? Tanya, hydrogen is such a critical piece of this puzzle, particularly in the energy transition, and a great way to store renewables that we can use to manage not just the energy transition, but keep the lights on, right? As well. So talk about hydrogen as a way to make the grid more resilient and reliable. And frankly, what impact is using hydrogen and having the utilities integrate hydrogen more into their stack? What impact does that have on the ratepayer?
Sure. So thank you, Joan. So Ruben was talking about the importance of looking at both supply and demand for electricity across the grid. And we're looking at the demand. We're certainly seeing increasing demand for electricity across various sectors of the economy, certainly from transportation to buildings. And then data centers is a key end use that has been in the news quite a bit. And part of this is because of the increased use of AI and cloud services. And we're really seeing a surging demand of data centers for energy, which, if they're connected to the grid, can put quite a strain on the grid. So, looking at global electricity consumption, data centers are projected, the electricity demand for data centers is projected to double by 2030, to grow about 130% or so between now and 2030 in the US. And China, Europe, and Japan are very much following those same growth patterns. And for the most part, all of these data centers are relying on fossil fuels. So on one hand, there's a growing demand on the grid, putting strain on an antiquated grid in some areas, and then increased use of fossil fuels to meet this demand. And it's not just for the baseload power, the power that's used 24/7. It's also for the backup power, because you can't have data centers go offline. And so a lot of diesel generators are being used. Something like 70% of data centers globally rely on diesel generators for backup power. And what we're seeing there is in some states, particularly like Virginia, which has a really significant percentage of a growing data center segment of their economy, they're in some areas in Northern Virginia, they are really facing an air quality crisis because of the data centers running diesel generators. And so you get particulate emissions and NOx emissions and really causing local challenges. And so where does hydrogen come in? Hydrogen can provide a source of clean power for both baseload and backup. And hydrogen, when it's used, particularly in a fuel cell, has zero emissions, just water vapor. And this is happening. So there are planned projects across the US and internationally. I'll mention just a few in the US. Some are running, some are in the planning stages. Already, and so there's a big project planned in Texas called Data City, and it's going to be a 5-gigawatt campus, and the plan is to transition to hydrogen by 2028 using salt cavern storage. There was an exciting project recently announced using so Mesa is going to use 100% hydrogen gensets paired with a pyrolysis system that converts natural gas into hydrogen, and then the carbon emissions from that come out as a solid that can then be managed and not put directly into the atmosphere. And so there are quite a few examples, and I won't go on too much, but the main point I want to make is that hydrogen can really provide a reliable source of clean power, and it can either run as baseload 24/7, or it can provide backup power, and you get the local air quality benefits as well. And so, yes, of course, there are some challenges with respect to pricing and some of the changes in the IRA tax credit, the 45V hydrogen production tax credit in the House version, it basically ends in 2025. So if a project hasn't started construction in 2025, there's not going to be eligibility for the project. So there are definitely challenges, but I also think that the technology is improving rapidly, and just the service that it provides, the technical aspects of the reliable clean power, I think we're going to continue to see more of them. I mean, another example that there's some technologies that are fuel flexible, so maybe they're starting off with natural gas. So like you have Bloom's fuel cells, which can run on natural gas, and then they can also be converted to be able to run on hydrogen. So that's an option. And then you have linear generators, which really are truly fuel flexible. So depending upon the available supply of hydrogen, you can use natural gas, you can use biomethane, you can use hydrogen, and that provides a lot of flexibility.
Great. That's really important. That's really valuable to know that flexibility is there. Scott, I want to jump to you quickly. You wrote an article that caught my attention, my friend. So you wrote, or you were quoted, I should say, in the International Business Times about the impact of America pulling back from the transition to a clean energy future, while the rest of the world is moving forward and even accelerating its transition to a clean energy future. So, talk about that and talk about the point you were making in that article. And this is an important point for all of us to know who want to make sure that America doesn't necessarily fall behind. I mean, we're a connected planet, right? We're all dealing with the same climate change, but there is obviously economic competitiveness. So what's the point that you're making there, and talk about America's competitiveness and also, in the context of the energy transition?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. Really, the point of that was that as we pull out of our net zero leadership position and pull back from net zero, we've now made ourselves less competitive on the world stage. In particular, if you look at European, Asian banking regulations that are driving that, now can American banks compete on the world stage? but also can American companies compete, right? So if we don't have that shareholder push, that investor push, that lending push to adopt more and more of the net zero requirements, do we abandon that leadership position? And I think it's pretty clear if you look at what's going on at a federal and a large commercial policy on DEI and other things. It's clear that if we don't have that requirement, companies won't do it if it costs them a single dollar more. So again, I think it really shows that policy can have a strong effect on what happens long term as companies go to adopt things. And if they are not rewarded or not punished for following the regulations of the world stage, they're going to do what's in their best bottom interest. And I think that's the real rubber we're having right now. I think if you look at that on a bigger policy stage, again, I don't want to get political here, but the Republicans talk about not picking winners and losers, yet clearly there's a pick of the oil and gas industry over everything else. I would say full picture, I think everyone is kind of echoing the same thing. The only way we're going to meet the demand of the next multiple decades is an all of the above strategy. It's not going to be just natural gas. It's not going to be just solar. It's not going to be just wind. It's certainly not going to be nuclear in the short-term horizon. What are we really going to go do? And the only way we do that is either we level the playing field for everybody, everything is all the above, everyone gets the same or no tax credits, but we somehow need to adopt a policy at a national level that incentivizes everyone to do what's best for the grid. We're not going to get there unless we are willing to let that go to China and other countries.
Yeah, and I want to jump to Alliant quickly, but let me just ask you this. I don't know if you heard it this morning, but Politico Energy's episode talked about the Republican position being that they thought that because the US was so dominant in fossil fuels, that we should just keep going in that direction and kind of abdicate, if you will, that the clean energy sector to China because they're already so far ahead. Do you want to respond to that thought process?
I think it's hard to justify that with the tariffs, right? So if the viewpoint is we're going to let China become the manufacturing or continue to be the manufacturing powerhouse of the world, then what is the point of the tariffs? We're incentivizing a domestic manufacturing policy for something that we don't believe in, or is there a better underlying strategy there?
Great point. Great point. Alain, I'm gonna jump to you, and I know we need to move to the second set of questions at this point, but I'll kind of blur them together for you if that's okay. As Tanya mentioned, and we've all talked about, the increased demand from AI and data centers is astronomical. I mean, her point that 70% of data centers rely on diesel generators for backup just kind of made my stomach turn, especially because I live in Virginia. But so how reliably can the North American grid, as it exists today, accommodate this growth? And what can we what needs to be done to what can to kind of merge into the second topic on top of that is what can state and local agencies outside of the feds do to help make their own, make sure their constituents get power and don't have blackouts like I did?
Yep. Well, thank you, John. Excellent question. The first answer is, as far as I'm concerned, we need decentralization. I'm coming from the power grid. I used to work for Phil Harris for a number of years. It was a great honor. The first thing I experienced when I started at PJM is that we got the Great Northeast blackout, August 14, 2003. I was new. I was shuttling back and forth between the control room and Phil was being interviewed by CNN. We had no clue what happened. But what came out of that is that we started a global association together with our colleagues in Europe, in Asia, Australia, and South Africa to figure out how to detect the kind of blackouts you're talking about and how to mitigate the consequences of those blackouts. The central power grid is getting extraordinary, very complex to manage. It's getting old, and to me, the solution is distributing the grid. And for example, going back to Ruben, developing microgrids, accelerating the development of microgrids, and turn the microgrids or even the nanogrids into participants in the overall grid operations. And if you participate the right way, call that virtual power plant, advanced virtual power plant, if you integrate the economics and the physics, there is a path to go there. Thinking that we're going to solve all the problem by building more transmission and distribution, we're going to make things more complex, and it's not going to work better. And as a matter of fact, another thing I wanted to say, okay, coming to the AI data centers. Okay, right now, it's all over the place. Okay, there are a lot of superlatives being used. Yes, if you take a 100 to 150 megawatt super AI centers, it's going to have an impact, no question about that. But there are solutions, and those solutions are called co-location of generations. That's called microgrids again. You know that the companies like Oklo are developing small nuclear reactors that will be co-located with the data centers, and some future nuclear plants being developed are going to produce hydrogen instead of electricity. So let me tell you something about an AI data center, okay? It's 100 to 150 megawatts. Well, we're electrifying right now the semi-trailers, okay? Charging, do you know what it takes to charge competitively 25 semi-trailer trucks? It takes one data center load. In other words, charging 25 electric trucks simultaneously is going to bring in 15 minutes, which is where the industry is going, is going to take as much electricity or load as a fully AI data centers. So if you think that about 1.2 million of those trucks by 2035 will probably be electric. You're talking about the equivalent of, I don't remember my mass, is I think 48,000 AI data centers. So, but we have to look at all those resources as parts of the solution, not parts of the problem. And I've been in this industry long enough. Technology prevails. Technology will prevail as long as the capital is there, as long as the regulators and the policymakers talk all together.
Exactly. Karen, I want to jump off that. I'm fascinated by the Grid Modernization Index that you guys have been doing. So you're benchmarking various grid-related policies, strategies, and investments. It's kind of jumping off of what Alain was saying and others have said. So talk about the Grid Modernization Index. What's it finding today? Like, what is it? Take us into that information and explain how it works and what its findings are and what we can learn from it to affect our decision making going forward, and what maybe utilities can use from it.
Well, the Gridwise Alliance has done the Grid Modernization Index 7 or 8 times over the last 15, 18 years. We're in the process of revamping the entire project. But what we have done in the past is look at a variety of variables that influence grid modernization state by state and rank the states in their progress toward grid modernization. And what we realized in the beginning of 2022 was that the infrastructure bill contained billions of dollars of funding for grid modernization projects, and that this would be a key time for us to really do a deep dive and much more comprehensive data so that we could set a baseline for where the grid stands across the country. And grid modernization is happening, I like to say, in a patchwork fashion, meaning state by state, there are different policies, there are different drivers for grid modernization, even utility to utility within a state. So what we really wanted to do was provide a whole set of roadmaps for states to drive investments in grid modernization based on their individual circumstances. So when I looked at the original grid modernization indexes, I used to flip through to the back to look at all the variables that were used to rank the states, because I thought, well, if I'm a state, how do I improve my ranking? And it was hard to tell from the way our appendix listed the variables. So what we decided to do was to put those questions out there for people to be able to do self-assessments and to be able to look at the things that are key to grid modernization, things like customer engagement, things like technology deployment, things like grid architecture and policy. And so we put out a grid modernization index framework that you can find on our website that lists over 100 questions that we are looking at state by state. And now we're in the middle of a very complex data collection effort that is the first. We're working with the consultants, and it's the first big AI research project that they've ever done. And we're using AI to look across the states and across utilities at the kinds of investments that they're making for grid modernization. And we anticipate that this next grid modernization index will be out in August or September of this year. And I think that it'll have a whole new set of insights. And we will be making the data public this time around, which has never been done before. So we'll have state by state, and in some instances, utility by utility, insights into where things stand with grid modernization.
Oh, great. Okay. I'm going to book you publicly for Electric Ladies podcast to talk about that report in August.
Excellent.
Just thought I'd put that out there. I'm fascinated. And how you're defining grid modernization. I mean, it sounds like you're letting the states to a degree decide, and by August, who knows what it'll be, right? I could talk to you about that for about 7 hours. Salima, do you want to see if there's a question? I want to jump to Ruben, but if you can grab a couple questions for us from the audience, that'd be great. Ruben, data centers, the topic du jour. So throwing a wrench in things, right? It goes to your paradigm of focus more on demand than just supply, right? So what are even with the best laid plans of managing this complicated ecosystem, data centers are throwing a wrench in it and screwing up the grid. And as Tanya talked about, neighborhood air as well. So what are the digital solutions that can maybe reduce data centers are inherently, they're technological. So why don't we use technological solutions, i.e. digital, to help reduce their impact and frankly, maybe make them a little less noisy too, because they're noisy as heck and disrupting communities.
Yeah, no, it's a terrific question. So I'm going to take a glass half full approach here. Schneider Electric is very active with data centers all the way around the world. And on one hand, you're right. We could look at data centers as a challenge to the grid, which is true, in that they are leading to some of the massive load growth that's been referred to by a number of the other panelists. But what I would also say is they also are the engines behind AI and machine learning that will allow for us to use some of the technological advancements in order to be able to take a lot of the complexity that is now imposed on the grid by virtue of some of these distributed energy resources, as opposed to it historically being centrally generated, and help make sense of that. And so that's the way that we're utilizing data centers to think about how can they become grid interoperable. Which leads us to an announcement that we made earlier this year that we joined as EPRI's DC Flex initiative. And that is a group of ISOs, it's a group of hyperscalers, technology providers, and EPCs that are all trying to figure out the same thing: is how do you address all of this? How do you address all of this load growth? And so I think there are a few different things that are happening. One is around this DC Flex is one example of how people are getting together to find technological solutions. Maybe you're able to shift the time at which you're doing some of the training of the AI models and or inferencing. So depending on whether or not it needs to be, kind of located close to, from a latency perspective, are all different questions that need to be asked. But I think that there is things that you could look at that allow for you to shift some of the compute that reduces the requirements of the grid when there are peak usage. So that would be one thing that I would put in for consideration.
No, that's great. That just it kind of reminds me of timing charging your electric vehicle off peak hours too. Kind of same principle, right? Yeah.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Yeah, and I'd also say that in the end, this is a team sport. And so I mentioned this DC Flex as one example of how multiple stakeholders are getting together. There are also opportunities where you see private capital that's also coming in here to be able to help make things like energy parks, many of which are very large, can be a couple hundred megawatts. I'm starting to see some upwards of a gigawatt. And the idea is to make industrial scale microgrids. And if you look at some of the underlying power sources there, a lot of those are renewable. So I think that if you kind of project that out, today, time to power is the most critical thing for a lot of these data centers. And so what they're looking for is bridge power that takes them from where they are today into a point into the future where the grid can support that incremental load. So if that happens, I can see a future where you're able to take that bridge power and then start to use that for grid services in the future, which kind of helps address the challenge that we have in some of the grid constraints that we currently have in the space.
That's really helpful. Salima, I'm gonna jump. You popped a question up there, and I think it looks like it's from Stephen Knapp. Before I go on to Tanya and Alon, resiliency. Thank you. Resiliency and reliability are incumbent upon the balance between spinning inertia, traditional generation, fossil gas versus intermittent renewable energy resources, e.g. inverter-based resource IBR, and the ability to maintain a 60 hertz network. Frequency recovery from an event so what's the question? The explanation, okay, so it's about balancing reliability requirements. Are we reaching an intersection between the reliability and energy?
May I answer that one, John?
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah. What the question is addressing is the stability of the power grid, and the power grid is like a big car, if you wish, with good shock absorbers, and they're balancing very carefully all those generators that are interconnected. We had a number of blackouts in California in the 90s. There was a very famous blackout in southern Australia 3 or 4 years ago, and then we got the Iberia blackout. What's happening is that as we get more renewable generation, replacing those large mechanical machines that have a lot of inertia, we're introducing a lot of stability concern. It's like driving a car full speed on a bumpy road without shock absorber. So what we need is to combine renewable with storage, whether it's electrical storage or thermal storage, which is one of the things we do, and basically that's what's needed. And with the inverter-based machines, which are referred to in the question, there is an opportunity to introduce synthetic inertia into the system to replace the loss of inertia from those big power generators.
Right. So Scott, you're a technical guy. If you want to respond to that, feel free. But I'm also looking, like, if you're going to expand that into the technology challenges and harnessing storage to support the grid, kind of loop that in with it goes with the question from Stephen Knapp and
Yeah, I
Alana's
mean, I think
response.
for behind the meter assets, and I'll focus in on that a little bit, is about connecting that into, again, the private capital markets. Where is there a financial incentive for these resources to play? When we look historically at PJM demand response programs, that's been a great vehicle. So everything from curtailment of industrial load to facility operations changes to battery storage systems all get integrated to provide that VPP capability, that virtual power plant capability. But there has to be a financial incentive for customers to install, own, operate, maintain, interrupt operations, whatever that mechanism might be. Without that clear market signal and without some stability of what that market signal looks like, it's hard for people to make that investment. This goes back to where you started this conversation with lack of consistent policy over time, but also lack of consistent policy as you cross state boundaries is detrimental to how we deploy energy in this country. I can go build solar in California at certain size limits. I can go across the state to a different state, and it's a very different limit on net metering, on what the incentives look like, on what the tariffs look like. That lack of policy makes it really hard for a layperson that is just trying to run facilities across the United States to understand, why does it matter if my plant's in California or Arizona or Ohio or Pennsylvania, and I can do different size solar systems? I may or may not want to do energy storage. But back to that question, I think really the intersection of the distributed assets and helping those provide the grid reliability, like Elaine said, are very clear. There is a technical rationale. There's a technical standard that lets that happen from inverter-based systems, but the utilities aren't tapping into that. And again, that goes back to the question, how do we incentivize these utilities to go spend that money? They are more beholden right now to shareholders than they are to, again, ratepayers or customers. So that's a whole nother policy discussion.
Right, especially with the complexities going on in DC. Tanya, hydrogen is a good solution for providing that reliability in your world, right? But those hydrogen hubs, as you referenced a few minutes ago, are on the chopping block in this new bill. So how will those hubs, or what will the solution look like if it's not called a hub anymore, if that funding goes away?
I think a lot of the companies that were part of the hubs still want to figure out ways to move forward with their projects. So when you're taking, and the goal of the hubs was really to demonstrate the entire hydrogen supply chain from production, distribution to end use. And so I think what's going to happen, this is a time when people are going to have to be creative and figure out ways to move their projects forward. And if you're looking at port decarbonization, looking at international shipping rules that perhaps could help incentivize clean shipping. If you're I have a lot of clients who are still interested in producing clean fuels in the US and then providing those to Asian and European markets. So I think going forward, there'll be policy drivers that are outside the US that will help keep some of those projects going. But not to say that it's going to be easy, but that's what I'm starting to see. And then also there's state policy. So in California, there is the low carbon fuel standard. There still is the renewable fuel standard at the federal level. And that's driving clean fuel policy. There might be this is again more on the transportation side, but it's relevant because if you're not drawing from the grid to charge your trucks and cars, then that provides some benefit to the grid. And so, and one thing I definitely am seeing, and Ruben alluded to this, it's kind of the bridge power idea. So there are areas where it's hard to get a grid interconnection. Maybe it's 3 to 5 years. And so in the meantime, microgrids are being built and they will be in place for as long as needed until that, say, heavy duty EV charging facility can get a grid connection. And then those can be fuel flexible. They can be charged with natural gas. The generators can run on, say the linear generators again can run on natural gas, or they can run on hydrogen or biomethane. And I think it's going to be that transition approach that's going to ultimately drive a lot of the innovation and keep these projects going.
And I bet fuel flexibility are the key words there. So Ruben, she invoked your name. I used my question to her to transition to our other last question on, frankly, capital, right? So topic you've talked about a lot, and Scott's talked about, and we've all talked about a lot, right? This stuff takes a lot of money.
It does.
Without the funding from the IRA and the Infrastructure Bill and the CHIPS Act, where does the capital come from? There are a lot of investors that believe in this, and to the points we've all been making, these are long-term investments and they take a while, and but we need them. I mean, all these people who are complaining they don't want to invest in this stuff, I bet they like to have their lights on and their computers run and their data centers run. So the money's got to come from somewhere. So what are the solutions, do you think, for where that capital will come from, and what are Schneider's clients looking at as replacement capital for these carrots, not the sticks, obviously, but the carrots maybe?
Yeah, there's a couple ways, Joan, that I'd answer this question. So I'd start first with the acute time to power. And because of the need that these data centers have to be able to support this compute, these investments pencil. And so one example that I alluded to just a moment ago around these energy parks, there was an example late last year, for example, where Google announced that they were doing an industrial scale microgrid along with TPG and others. So I think that there will be investments that will be happening, in the private sector in order to be able to support these bridge power or energy parks as one example. A second would be an emergence of a new business model. And so one example that Schneider is participating here is with a joint venture that we have with Carlyle called Alpha Structure. And so in this case, you bring technology provider along with capital provider, and then we provide energy as a service. So this is another opportunity where you're able to take off the table the roadblock that may have been capital constraints in the past, and then instead you have this joint approach whereby you make the investment. One specific example that we have is upgrading Terminal 1 at JFK with renewable power, but that's something that the airport doesn't need to pay for, right? So that's something that they can then use this new business model in order to be able to kind of make this work. One last, and this may be a little bit of an extension, Joan, on your question that I think is important though, is this notion of this being a team sport. And so this year we also launched what we're calling a digital grid platform. And so the idea here is it's an example of collaboration across different technology providers. And so we talked about these 3,500 or however many utilities we have in the United States that have all these legacy tech stacks that they've amalgamated over time. And so if we're able to identify first the opportunity to have first party applications and capabilities that Schneider Electric can do, great. But the second is to work with third party independent software vendors. And so in this way, you don't need to rip and replace. You're able to add and extract more value out of existing technology investments that utilities have made, and you're able to reduce the overall total cost of ownership, which thereby kind of helps with the affordability challenge that may otherwise have been in place on top of ratepayers. So I think there's a couple of different answers. One is you see the private investment that's happening. Two, you see the emergence of these new business models. And then three, you see partnerships so that you don't need to kind of start all over again, but instead extract value from investments that have already been made.
and use the digital tools to kind of get more from less, right? It's the proverbial energy efficiency model. That's so interesting. Yeah, anyway, I could drill into that for about a week. I think you said, Karen,
Yeah, I think
Go
can I chime
ahead.
in for a second? Yeah, I
Yeah,
think
please do.
one of the things that we're seeing in the capital markets, so we're doing, PPAs and leases, or did leases. We'll see if that's still available. But the capital markets are still going where there's good returns. The U.S. is still a good return market. There is still both foreign and domestic capital that is, I'd say, increasingly selective about those good projects, but there is certainly lots of capital sitting on the sidelines waiting for clarity, and happy to step in and finance these projects as long as the returns are good. I think this goes back to consistency. Consistent policy lets capital have consistent timelines and consistent viewpoints on how things are going to come together. I think we're seeing that pause right now, but certainly there is a lot of capital that's going to go fund these projects. And take on some of that risk, right? So I think from a customer perspective, if you're uncertain about the IRA, let a third party take that risk on. If you're uncertainty on a lot of other things, again, let third party capital take that on. Let's not forget, it's always been a tax credit. It's never been a rebate. It's never been a cash grant, other than for nonprofits that can't otherwise take a tax credit. But it is still, you've got to spend the money to get a tax credit back. That seems to be lost in the equation, but it is part of what that process has been under the IRA, and under the predecessors going all the way back to the Bush administration, Bush 1, I think it was, or Bush 2. But that policy has been there for a long term, and I think again, capital is still chasing the good projects.
If I could jump in here, because I think
Yeah,
that
please do.
when we're talking about utility investment, I think it's really important to note that there are at least 3 different business models for utilities. There's the investor-owned utilities, which are they are beholden to their stockholders, and they're usually much larger. And then there's public power, usually owned by municipal governments, and rural co-ops, which are member-owned utilities that serve the rural areas, and in some instances may have 500 meters. And so what works for a big investor-owned utility in terms of an investment strategy doesn't, and the incentives and the tax credits and things like that don't necessarily work for the public power groups of utilities. And so I think that when we talk about how we modernize the grid and how we get these investments and grid modernization to support a clean energy transition, the kinds of approaches that we take have to look different for the different kinds of utility business models.
Oh, for sure. And they need different kinds of financing model, right? They're incentivized differently, and some are more dependent upon state incentives than others, right? I mean, obviously the investor-owned utilities are less dependent upon tax credits, right? Maybe than the others. Yeah. So, Tanya, talk about the role of hydrogen and where that funding is coming from. What are they hearing? We talked about this a minute ago, but are they hearing from the capital markets that there's an investment to be had in hydrogen, or is it too far afield for some people to understand? Where are those investors coming from that are, for lack of a better word, hip to the value of hydrogen, and they see that it pencils out?
What I'm seeing is that good projects will be funded. As Scott mentioned, there is capital to be deployed and looking for good projects. They tend to be, the key really is projects that have an off-taker, and ideally have a long-term off-taker is a big challenge. So we are seeing projects get funded that are providing hydrogen to transit agencies, that are providing essentially existing markets, and along those lines, that are providing hydrogen to then make other products. So providing hydrogen to make ammonia that's then used for fertilizer, and sometimes that's on a distributed basis to help solve some of the ammonia supply chain issues that have been a global issue. So it's an innovative technology that solves a problem, and it's not necessarily just a direct use of hydrogen. It could be, there was interest for a while when the tax credits were a little bit better for hydrogen to sustainable aviation fuel, hydrogen to renewable diesel, hydrogen to methanol. So to some extent, it's still being sorted out, and people are looking at where the best returns are going to be. There's also an increasing interest in e-fuels, e-methane. So you take hydrogen with captured carbon, projects that are maybe using refinery off-gas hydrogen that was previously vented as a waste, and then combining that with captured carbon to create e-fuels. So all to say, what I'm seeing is kind of a lot of innovation and creativity, looking for markets in order to be able to get that funding. But there are projects being funded.
I love that. That's creative thinking. Yeah, that's kind of what Ruben was talking about, of data centers as a tool, as well as, I mean, you can use those data centers to solve, other energy challenges than just have another purpose, right? So we're at the point of closing thoughts here, and I could talk to you guys together for about a week, so I'm going to resist the temptation. But why don't you, who wants to start here? So why don't you start, Karen, with your hand on the grid and the utilities. Talk about maybe the role of state incentives, or your final thoughts, and kind of let's do this. How about, what should we do going forward? What can those of us who are listening do to help accelerate the energy transition and support those who are trying to make it happen?
Well, I look to the efforts that the Tennessee Valley Authority is doing. They are a big bulk power provider, and they sell power to 152 or 53 distribution utilities. And they're working with all of those utilities to move those utilities up the technology ladder, so that all of them are better integrated with the bulk power system. And as I mentioned, grid modernization is happening in a patchwork fashion. So to the extent that we can help identify sort of a suite of technologies and grid functions that each utility should sort of be ready to have, I think that brings us to a place where we can help drive some very strategic investment and get the grid to be the platform for all of these changes that we want, meeting energy demand, being more flexible and reliable. So really sort of looking at that suite of technologies that everybody should have access to.
Oh, that's great. That's brilliant. Ruben, what can we do to accelerate the clean energy transition and protect the grid? Keep the lights on.
Yeah, look, if I could finish with an optimistic view again, a lot of the technology required to address some of the challenges that are ahead of us exists today. And so for me, I think part of it is working with utilities to get them comfortable with taking solutions from pilot into full-scale implementation. That would be one thing. Another would be to make sure that we have policies that are in fact helping support things like common protocols, so that all the distributed solutions that are out there are kind of speaking the same language, and so that you can orchestrate them all together. And then another may also be, non-wire alternatives. How do you make that part of the overall planning cycle, so that it doesn't only come back to hardware, but this means taking instead of a CapEx approach, you're taking more of a total expenditure approach, and then working with regulators to make that something that ultimately is incentivized through regulation. So I'm very optimistic, and I think the final point that I'd make here is, if the technology exists, we have to move at pace. And so that would be the call to action that I would have, would be to be very intentional and to move as quickly as possible.
Yeah, no dragging our feet here. Scott, final thoughts?
Yeah.
On the solutions, what can we do?
Sure, I'll echo Ruben's comment. I mean, the technologies that are there, they're well true, they're proven, particularly as we look at distributed energy assets. There is plenty of technology out there that works. I think what we're seeing right now is, as grid electricity prices increase, it makes these technologies even more affordable. So maybe it's continue as we are, let prices keep going up, and everything else gets to be a lot easier. But truthfully, I think the reality is that the more we have again, the same message, consistent policy over time and over different geographies, the more we have an opportunity for customers to get comfortable that what they're going to do isn't going to get retroactively changed, that the economics are not going to get retroactively changed, et cetera. And having that ability to go build for the future is important. I mean, you're buying a car that's going to last 10 years or 5 years or whatever. You've got a planning horizon based on your economics. We don't have that same level at a building. You don't know what your rate's going to be. You hope you have visibility, but when we're seeing 20% rate increases year over year, it might drive behavior faster for adoption. So I think we have to recognize that customers are going to do things that are in their best interest, particularly on the C&I space. And I think we need to give them ample runway to make that happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And Alaa, bring us home. I just want to make the point that one other impact of the tariffs on all this is the materials that go into doing all this stuff. It's the steel, the aluminum, the critical minerals, etc. The supply chain of the energy system and the grid systems has an impact on this too, right? It's not just the funding for X, it's the parts that go into it. Alaa, what are your final thoughts and what can we do? Be optimistic.
Yeah, I've got a view which is a lot more optimistic. I've been around this industry for so many years now. We had a lot of issues. We had the 3 Mile Island. We had a lot of challenges. But I'm very optimistic. When we're talking about funding, I never relied on federal funding, certainly not on the tax credits. It took to me a long time to figure out that they were tax credit in the first place. I think there are 2 sources of funding from our perspective. One source of funding is from the energy markets themselves. If you understand the energy markets, the incentives, the utility incentives, and you stack all the revenues and all the values together, if you rely on existing storage, you don't need tax credits. We've got solutions today. We like New York State. New York State, NYSERDA, you were talking about NYSERDA. NYSERDA continues funding the transition, and we're engaged in that. And they have a great vision of the grid of the future. The grid of the future is going to need a lot of storage. We capitalize on that. We go after storage that is already there. And I'd love to talk to Ruben about Kennedy and a microgrid, because there are possibilities there. One thing, and the last thing, we have to look outside. We shouldn't think that we are the best around the world. There is innovation everywhere. Unfortunately, there is a lot more innovation in China now than we have here. There is innovation in Australia, where one of our partners in Australia has developed a Class 8 technology to replace direct charging of the tracks with swappable batteries. That means that we go and charge the batteries where and when it makes sense, okay? And we swap them in 4 minutes. There are great solutions out there.
Yeah, I love that. That's great.
Most importantly, we need cross-sector dialogue.
Yes.
We need to bring all the pieces of the puzzle together. Sorry.
Yes, absolutely. No, that's good. And that's a point that we've all been making as well, as we need integration, and it's an orchestra that we're all, conducting together, basically, right? So I just want to close and hand it over to Salima by saying thank you for this robust and vibrant discussion. You've given us all a lot to think about and a lot to focus on. I like that we can get out from under the day-to-day craziness and think about, well, what else can we do and where are the solutions coming from outside of here? There are pressures coming, economic pressures from outside the US too, with the reporting requirements and the regulations in Europe, et cetera, that are also forcing mechanisms. So thank you to everybody, Karen, Tanya, Scott, Ruben, and Alaa, Salima, of course. And I look forward to seeing you on Electric Ladies podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you to
Thank you.
we are at the end of our discussion today. Thank you to our expert guest today for this wonderful discussion and insight. We want to take also our attendees, Marshall, Stephen, and much others. I cannot say them all. Thank you for the question, and I invite everyone to come back on the 11th of December for a special women discussion on the same topic on energy and the grid transition. And until then, I wish to everyone a good health and see you soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.